Hi, Lauren here. Before we start today's episode, wanted to give a heads up that this episode does contain references to body dysmorphia and eating disorders. If you are in the United States and you are struggling with an eating disorder, there are resources. You can call the ANAD helpline at 1-888-375-7767 or the National Alliance for Eating Disorders helpline at 1-866-662-1235. We'll also post additional resources in our show description. Welcome to Who Are You, a CSI podcast. I am Lauren, and I've seen CSI through and through around 3 to 4 times.
And I'm Nick, and these are my first times experiencing these episodes.
And today we are reviewing the season finale, season 2, episode 23, The Hunger Artist. Original air date is May 16, 2002. Director is Richard J. Lewis. Writers are Anthony E. Zeiker and Jerry Stahl. And we begin, as we begin many episodes, with shots of the Vegas Strip. So, Nick, what is our Vegas and 0 Miami score for today?
Yes, no Miami score.
no Miami score today.
No bonus cities that I'm aware of.
Just Vegas.
I end up at 24. It's a little weird. There's a couple scenes to open with. Mm-hmm. There is another cut earlier, like later on.
Yes.
I kind of got a little I assigned some bonus points due to a large number of scenes involving like visible shots of the strips. I added like 3 bonus points. I was really trying to decide if it should be more than that.
Okay.
But I almost doubled it. One of the very early scenes, like the original crime scene without talking about it yet, you can see the strip like in the background the whole time.
Right.
And it's like I remember thinking like, oh, they went really Vegas-y for this last episode, and then I didn't really give it
like a high Vegas score.
I didn't really give it credit for that scene.
I will say that it felt very Vegas-y.
And there's very theme, and there's also, there's so many things. I think I was like, oh, I'll give it a few points for all these Vegas scenes. And I kept waiting to like see how many different intercut scenes there were.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's like 4 or 5 different, and in different parts of the strip. So it's a 24. That's what I wrote down. I'm not changing my answer. But it's a very strong 24. This is really like the Vegas-y level is really closer to like a 30.
Yeah.
I just don't really have a good accounting for shots of strip. I was remembering that episode where there was like a mobster who was killed in an elevator.
Yes.
And there's a whole bunch of scenes. They're in the strip. There are episodes where they're in the casinos. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you start counting time in those episodes, you're going to be off the charts.
Right.
So I don't really have a good system for that. Maybe season 3, I'll codify the rules for that. But we're at 24. I probably should have called it 25. I was trying to add 1 point for each one of those Vegas-y scenes. Okay. And as I was talking, I remembered actually he's on the strip at the final scene of this episode.
Not the right before the final scene.
Yeah.
The final scene
is
a different scene.
Yeah.
Which I'll legitimately not do spoilers. Yeah, I was like, I'll not do actual spoilers because that's like pretty near the end.
It's an important little like nugget.
Yeah,
they
in the middle.
Worked into, I think, because it's the season finale.
Yes.
So
we go from the Vegas trip to I guess like what we learn later is an apartment, but like could be a hotel room, but a dwelling of some sort. And there's a woman getting ready to bathe. She's like laying out like all the like grooming tools, and she's clipping her hair up, and she's starting to run the water for the bath. And then we see her as she's using the tools. We just see the water just cascading over the sides of the tub as she's what we're led to believe is like plucking her eyebrows. We later find out that is not in fact what's happening, but at the moment you're kind of led to believe like, oh, she's like plucking her eyebrows, like she's grooming herself, and the water's running over the tub.
So technically this is a spot that guest star.
Oh, this is also a spot guest star for me, but I was going to wait until we saw her in the shopping cart.
Oh, okay. I was going to wait maybe for the digital reconstruction, which is when I knew for sure who this was.
Yes. But we can do it now. We can do it now. So this is
Trisha Helfer.
Yes.
And that's important because this is maybe the first time I'm going to create credit for spotting the credit. she's credited in the opening credits, and I know her name.
Oh, see, I don't know her name. I just legitimately started watching Battlestar Galactica.
Okay, because... yeah, which would be my number one place that I know her from the new version of Battlestar Galactica.
Yes.
She plays number 6. I forget, she has a bunch of different names.
Caprica, Natalie Faust.
Yeah, at the beginning of the show, you don't know that she is a Cylon. At the end of the show, you do know more about her, which I guess if you're just watching it, it's I mean, if you see these names in there, you're kind of getting spoilers anyways. But this opening scene, because I had just like seen her name or whatever.
Yeah, in the opening credits.
And I was like, wait, is that her? But I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
There's no, they don't show her face, which is important.
Yes.
But it's like, it certainly looks a lot like her because she's noticeabably very tall.
Yes.
Blonde.
Yes.
And, so it was in the back of my mind. And then I wasn't really thinking about it. And it wasn't until this like digital reconstruction scene later on where I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely her.
You're like, for sure.
And then there's so many pictures of her.
So many pictures of her.
Half of them I don't think look anything like my idea of what she looks like. And
right.
A lot of them do. So, but yeah, this is one, and I am sure there's a later Spot the Guest Star. I'm sure you also have in common with me.
I would imagine so, yes.
Yeah.
Because I have one more Spot the Guest Star, and I imagine that it's the same person. But we have a little while before we get there. Yeah. So we then have a short scene where Grissom is sitting, like, waiting in a doctor's office. He gets a call. He lets the receptionist know or the nurse know, like, hey, I need to reschedule this appointment. I gotta go. He arrives on scene. Jim Brass is already there. Dead woman in a shopping cart. This is where I marked the Spot the Guest Star. But
Did you recognize her at this point? Because Dead woman in the shopping cart is unrecognizable in my opinion.
I think I was like, again, I legitimately watched Battlestar Galactica like 2 days before I watched this episode. So I think I was like, is that
on
her?
The rewatch, I saw it.
And then as the show progressed, I was like, oh, that's for sure her.
On the rewatch, it was a lot more obvious, especially like on close-ups.
Yeah.
But like I already knew what I was looking for.
Yeah. We get a scene that they reference several times, but has no effect on the storyline, where a rat crawls out of her mouth.
Yes. I wrote down, this is the worst line ever. The whole exchange of rat crawls out of her mouth. Jim Brass was just like, she's not talking. And Grissom goes, well, she ratted on herself. And I went, this is the worst line the show has ever written.
And then go to credits. And I will also say, I always laugh because obviously they put this in there to like gross you out and, make you uncomfortable and like, ew, rats are gross. I foster rats for a rescue called Mainly Rat Rescue. I'll put their information in the show notes for this episode. And like, I just have 2 giant squishes here. And obviously this is like a trained rat. This is a pet rat in this scene. It's not, they didn't use a wild rat for this scene. This is a pet rat. And that's my Chihuahua, Gabby, who is probably mistaken for a rat sometimes with how small she yelling at goodness knows who. But yeah, I just always laugh because they're always like, ew, gross rats. And I literally was like, oh, look at how cute it is. Like, it's so fluffy.
Fun fact for our audience, Lauren knows this. I am basically deadly allergic.
He's deadly allergic
to a lot of rodents, particularly rats and rabbits. Not like instantaneously, but if you locked me in a closet for an hour, I would probably need an ambulance or more, or a hearse. So I actually owned a rat for a very short period of time, loved owning a rat, and only had to get rid of it because I couldn't breathe.
And breathing is important. So that lovely line brings us to credits. We return to Grissom. He's placing markers on the scene. He finds a planner. He also finds syringes. This brings us to Grissom with Doc Robbins, but Doc Robbins is saying that she has no signs of drug use. Like, she doesn't have, track marks or anything like that. There's no, like, at this stage, overt signs of regular drug use.
He does have how the rat kids are or anything.
Yes, yes. Again, this rat that really plays, no role in the storyline whatsoever does get mentioned once or twice. She does have puncture wounds in her forehead, though, from Botox. And I found it interesting that, like, Botox wasn't new when this came out, but I think it wasn't as, like, widely used as it is today or widely known about, because it was like, ooh, Botox.
I think it was fatty at the time, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm sure it had been around for a while, but I think it was becoming cheaper and more widely available. And also, a lot of these things, I think, end up in, like, the news. And they end up in shows like this years later, like 3, 4, 5 years later.
Yeah.
So, But yeah, that was it's weird because I had this similar idea. It's like when did that become popular? Like not just
Right, because
I'm sure you could look up when it came out, but like that
because they
doesn't
made
tell
it
you.
seem like in this episode that it wasn't a super, like it was known, but it wasn't super well known, right? Like it kind of gave
Mhm.
off that vibe. But they're also, she, if you had watched the episode, you would notice at this point she has like these horrible like gashes and like crevices all over her face. And Doc Robbins is surprised that despite having these wounds on her face, there's no ligature mark. So they're trying to figure out like how could someone have inflicted these wounds on her without her being restrained?
Yeah, like the amount of pain that should have gone under. They don't talk about it, but I would assume they look for things like anesthesia and her
Right.
talk screen. Like they
Yeah.
said there was nothing on her talk screen, so that would have been like a barbiturate or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's like they had to they're it's a mystery to be unraveled.
Yeah. So we then go to Sarah and Warwick. Sarah's looking over the planner that was found there, but as she's trying to like understand it, she realizes that it's in code. And we come back to this coded planner so many times in this episode. Yeah. But this is the introduction to the code in the planner. Warwick IDs that one of the other items that doesn't like quite fit with who they assume is like an unhoused victim at this time is a $500 handbag. So like, why does this victim have a planner? Why is there a $500 handbag? Like, this isn't really jiving with like the current idea of who they think this person is. Catherine then walks into one of the lab techs named Dusty. She is reconstructing the victim's face by like basically Photoshop. She's basically, in the easiest way of explaining it, she is using Photoshop to clear out all the blemishes and all the wounds and all the gashes and give a picture of what this woman would look like without these wounds. And once they do that, Dusty's like, I know her. Like, I know her from, I don't know where, but like, I know her.
I know her too, Dusty. That's what I said.
Yeah, you're like, also me. Catherine then walks into Grissom and lets him know, and I'm curious how you felt about this. They refer to this victim as girl throughout the entire episode. They're like, this girl, and she's a young, she's not in her 50s, but she is a woman. Like, she is not a child. This is not like a 7-year-old girl that we're dealing with. I don't know. That
there's one scene
rubbed me the wrong way.
There's a scene in her apartment where Catherine refers to her as a girl, and I kind of keyed up on that. And they show like some pictures of dolls and stuff. I will say probably because I'm not like in tune to it, didn't really pick up on that, but
yeah,
I think it might be interesting going forward to see if they refer to like anyone of like a different gender the same kind of way. Would they refer to a young man as boy? Like we've had actual boys, like a 15-year-old.
I can almost guarantee you they don't.
Yeah, I was like, I wouldn't expect
almost
they do.
Guarantee you.
I'm honing in on that. It's like I think you're probably right. That's probably a big bias on the writer's part. Yeah. It's also probably worse because it's 20-some years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I wonder how much of it is her age and how much of it is just like the sort of social status they're putting on her.
But she's supposed to be a sex symbol, so I find it especially weird that they keep calling her girl.
Well, that could be even a worse reason why they might not. No, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying it's an even creepier reason.
Yeah.
Right? Like, put the girls kind of mantra.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
I think a lot of times when men sexualize women, the word girl gets thrown out a lot more often than woman.
Yeah.
Girl is often, I think, especially at this time, I've used just as like female.
Yeah.
But what makes it weird, but like it's almost a carryover from like, it's a very, I think, misogynistic reason why, right?
Yeah.
It's almost a downplay a whole gender.
Yeah. It bugged me the entire episode, but
I think that probably is a good call, that it's inappropriate, right?
Yes.
This episode, and some of it's probably timely, and it probably is because people have used that term derogatively towards
and the writers
you and other women in
the writers for this episode are all men.
Yeah.
There's no female writer
And
on this episode.
there's no sensitivity people involved in the industry at this
No.
point in time.
No, this is
They
very
all
true.
think they're very PC, but as we've alluded to many times,
They're not.
Some of these scripts do not age well.
No, they do not.
And there's a lot of so I didn't pick up on this, but I picked up on a lot of other things that I just thought were really kind of like cringy in this episode in different conversations.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get there. There's quite a few of them.
There's some comments back and forth, some that have already happened and some that are coming up. And so it's a good connotation. It's very sort of single-minded writer's room, potentially.
Yeah. So we learn in the scene that the victim is Ashley James. She is a cover girl. And this is where Grissom makes the assumption that the murderer must have wanted to make her ugly. Like, wanted her ugly. That's why they, like, totally mutilated her face.
One of the weird things with this episode is they make all these sort of prophetic things that they like to do in episodes.
Yes.
But they're wrong the whole episode.
Yes.
And I was surprised they're still
Spoiler
doing
alert.
that. They're wrong. Yeah.
They're
We've had
wrong.
a lot of like left field solutions recently.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really not learning their lessons.
No. Grissom and Catherine then go to her apartment. Jim Bress is already there. Just pictures of her all over the walls. Like, all the walls are just pictures, like from different photo shoots and things like that, all over the wall. And this is where they start to think like maybe her boyfriend is a drug user. It's starting to look like she's not a drug user, but there's drugs in the house. And so
Catherine pulls like a travel like toiletry kit out of a random cabinet and is like, oh, this must be a dude's thing, and pulls a razor out of it.
Yeah. Which comes back around. They do test the blood on the razor. Nick and Worker with the car. Jim Brass walks over. There is just tons of food wrappers in the car. The car is
junk food.
Filled with just junk food, fast food wrappers, things of that nature are just piled inside of this car.
I thought there was going to be a product placement in this episode. It actually technically happens later.
Okay.
The fake Dunkin' Donuts box reminds me so much of Dunkin' Donuts. I thought it said Dunkin' Donuts.
You were like, oh,
and
wow.
I thought they're like, wow, they really put a lot of these out. They're really like pushing Dunkin' Donuts, and then I actually have it crossed off. I wrote it down and then crossed it off.
It's not Dunkin' Donuts.
I realized it just says Donuts. I was like, nope, they did not pay to have their logo in this. This is just fake props.
This is just donuts. We return to Grissom in the apartment. He's in her bathroom. Catherine's there as well. They're noticing that there's blood in the sink, but not on the floor. And they're finding this to be strange. They also...
Can I say, I didn't clock this the first time, but the second time around, according to Brass, this whole apartment flooded that it filled the basement as a swimming pool. What blood were you expecting to find on the floor?
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
None of the rugs are wet. Nothing is.
Yeah, they're not like squishing as they're walking through.
I was like, they explain like when the water got turned off much later in the episode.
Much later in the episode.
But like the rest of the scene, there is no indication that this apartment flooded at any point.
No. Good point. I again, here you are just catching things that I am 100% missing.
It's only because of the blood on the floor line. I was like, and then I couldn't get off of it. I was like, why would there be blood on the floor? It's bathtub was running.
Yeah. They find an enema. Grissom makes a sweeping generalization about women. Catherine calls him out on it, though. Thankfully, so I'm like, thank you, Catherine. Catherine's like, don't generalize. Like, why? Don't think that this magically applies to all women. And Grissom is like, oh, yeah, you're right. Like, I shouldn't do that. But it's like, what is the point in this scene other than to, like, make Grissom look bad? I don't...
He's been making similar comments for a while.
Yeah, that is true. This is not, like, totally out of left field for him.
But, like, this kind of call-out is so out of line with everything else they do in this episode.
It's so out of... It doesn't...
It's like, did they get a memo? And they're like, oh, we have to work something in?
I don't know. It feels so... Like, I'm glad that Catherine calls him out, but otherwise it just feels awkward and out of place, and it just doesn't fit into the rest of the episode, as you mentioned.
Maybe the actress kind of threw it in there unscripted and they decided to keep it in.
Maybe. Grissom finds a bag with maybe vomit in it.
I mean, that's definitely what it was.
What it looks like. They don't say it, but you're just kind of like, oh, that's probably what that is. We return to Warwick and Nick at the car. They find a note that sounds like it's from like an ex or a stalker. It's a weird sounding, like, you're gonna regret this sort of threatening note. Grissom and Catherine are then are still in the house. They're still in the apartment. Catherine finds this like ratty, speaking of rats, this ratty black coat in the closet that's like just all tattered. It just doesn't, dirty. It just doesn't like, this is not something that like a supermodel is going to be walking around wearing. It just seems very, very strange.
It's a really avant-garde fashion show.
Very avant-garde, but we learn later on not what this jacket means. We come back to this coat, this jacket. Grissom is then like walking off from the scene, and this was a scene I better appreciated on the second watch through, because I was like, oh right, you think that he's purposefully ignoring Warwick and Nick. Warwick and Nick are trying to get his attention as he's walking away, and you're like, oh wow, he's like so self-absorbed in his own stuff that he is not like, he's like not hearing them. But spoiler alert, he's legitimately not hearing them.
Yeah. And they do something very, so again, this thing I only picked in the second walkthrough. They have him walking very awkwardly.
Yes.
Which I don't know if this is supposed to be related to sort of any sort of inner ear related medical problem and balance or something, or just how he's walking, but they very much show him walking this way later on in the episode when you're supposed to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they kept that, they mirrored that in this scene this is potentially the best scene of the whole episode.
Yeah.
In terms of like what's going on here and how it relates to everything else.
Yeah, how it ties ended up tying back into everything else. Yeah.
If there's any good writing and directing in this episode, we're witnessing it right now.
Yeah. So he walks through like alleyways. There's a lot of unhoused people.
Another shot of the Vegas casinos.
Yes, you kind of like see the casinos in the background. He finds Sarah because he ends up like arriving at the original crime scene where they found the shopping cart. He finds Sarah there. Sarah points out a billboard right there with Ashley on it. She's like, hey, isn't that our victim? And so now they're starting to think like she was very purposefully placed here.
And I think the point of the walk is that he's realizing that it's not that far from the apartment.
Yes.
And he's taking the journey, and it's
himself.
Flat and traversable by shopping cart.
Yes.
And he makes this sort of conjecture that she was put in the shopping cart and pushed here.
Yes.
And now that he's made that walk, he realizes how plausible that would have been.
Exactly. Agreed. Sarah's back with the planner, trying to decipher the code. Just one of many Sarah trying to decipher the code scenes.
JJJ.
Yep. Grissom enters. He's giving her some nuggets of advice that, you know, if she wants to understand the code, she needs to know the author. And then he also wants to know, like, who called the cart home? Because the cart didn't belong to the victim. The victim was placed in the cart, but the cart originally was not the victim's cart. And as they're kind of going through the contents and they're kind of being like, all right, this is Ashley's stuff. Like the planner is hers. The $500 handbag is hers. But then there's all these like newspapers or magazines. And then as they dig into them further, they realize they all have pictures of Ashley. So now they're like, is this a stalker? Like, was this someone like obsessed?
This is a fan
with Ashley. This is a fan.
A fanatic.
A fanatic.
I thought that was a good line.
Oh, it was a
little cheesy, but
a little. But I mean, CSI is supposed to be a little cheesy.
That's the kind of cheese that I'm here for.
Yeah, yeah. Nick and Warwick are then at a different house. They're knocking on the door, no one answers, and they're like, "Oh, Loverboy is not at home." So I think I feel like they really dropped the ball in this episode with explaining who the heck this guy is. Yes. Is it an ex-boyfriend? Is it just a random fan? Who is this person? They never answer this question.
I didn't even realize that this wasn't the person from the next scene until later on in that scene when this character shows up in that scene.
Gotcha.
And then they talk about it. Yeah. The scene after, like it was like I just didn't know what was going on. At the end of the day, it was not well explained.
No, I feel like this was another. Did they miss a scene? Was something said in a scene that they cut that helped like tie this storyline a little bit better together? Because this was just not done well in my opinion. But they did. I had to laugh at this and I was like, oh, Nick is going to appreciate this. Because we just had an episode very recently where they took something out of the trash and we were like, you can't just take something out of the trash.
Was it last episode or 2 episodes ago? It was very recently.
I think it was 2 episodes ago.
Yeah.
And we were like, you can't just take something out of the trash. Like, because in the episode we're referencing, the trash was inside somebody's business.
Yes.
And we were like, you can't just take something out of the trash that's inside somebody's business.
Like that is trash.
Yeah. They're like trash. And this one, work specifically is like trash on the street is fair game.
Yeah,
and I'm
Nick
like,
is somehow concerned about. He probably got a talking to after taking
yes,
trash out of the
he
business.
probably did.
That almost glosses the whole case if the guy didn't,
Yeah, totally just confess.
But yeah, and this, I made note of that. Actually, did I write that? No, I didn't. But I made a really big mental note of this. It's like, oh, now trash is okay.
Yeah. So they go through the trash and they find a ripped image of Ashley. So there's like a picture of Ashley, but it's like been torn to shreds.
Yeah, the little puzzle solve. Let's put it together. It's in the paper bag for some reason.
I don't know.
Apparently with some coleslaw. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. That's weird. They do reference coleslaw later. So we then go to a photo shoot, and then this is my, and I believe Nick's second.
Oh, for sure.
Spot. The guest star. This is the agent is Mark Shepard, who is in everything sci-fi and fantasy related. Like, if there's a sci-fi or fantasy show or movie, he legitimately is in it. But what...
You have 5 seasons on the CW. He's in 3 episodes.
Yes, he's in it. What I know him best from, which I think he probably is overall known best from, just being like the sheer number of episodes, is as Crowley in Supernatural.
Yes, that's what I have written down, Crowley in Supernatural. That's where I know him from first. And I think largely a lot of things I've seen him in since then. And actually going through his IMDb.
Like, he was in Firefly.
Yeah.
I think he's in the first episode of Firefly, actually. I think he's like in one of the earliest scenes of that show, I think.
He's in Battlestar Galactica, which
he's in Battlestar Galactica. I haven't gotten to that because it's later seasons of Battlestar Galactica. So I've not gotten to the episodes that he's in. But like,
Warehouse 13 is a great sci-fi show that I used to love. White Collar.
He's in the X-Files. Sliders.
Show I like. Oh yeah. Well, I was mentioning White Collar because it's actually the thing I've seen him in most recently, because my roommate likes White Collar and literally watches it on repeat sometimes.
Okay.
And I've walked in and seen, like, heard his voice. His voice is very sort of iconic, I feel like.
Yes, he does have a very distinct voice.
Apparently he's in 2 episodes to Doctor Who. I don't know what season or series I should say.
It must be the new series.
2011.
Yeah, so that's.
Well, I don't mean like which Doctor. I don't know.
Yeah. Let me just go see.
2 episodes of Chuck.
What's he in? Chuck.
I feel like you're a big Chuck fan.
I am a big Chuck fan. I'm trying to remember who he was in.
He's listed as ring director, so.
Oh, okay.
Probably a small bit part. No.
Okay, but yes. So
everything if you like anything
like sci-fi or fantasy, he's
procedural,
in it.
sci-fi, supernatural.
Yep, he's in it.
Apparently 6 episodes of 24.
Oh, okay. I've never seen 24, so I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I have. It may be a later season that I haven't watched, or it's just so long ago I forgot. But yeah, you have probably seen him. Yes,
you almost guaranteed to see him. So we learn that he is the agent. His name is Rod Darling. He's like yelling at this poor model who can't fasten her top, and she's tiny. And you're supposed to know that she's tiny. Like, this woman is itsy bitsy, and he's screaming at her about eating, basically, at all.
I actually thought this could have been a spot the guest star.
Oh, the model.
Yeah, I mean, they're not, so
okay.
But like, they looked very familiar. But I just think that it's very sort of like. Looks like a lot of models, basically, of that time.
So we learned that he used to be Ashley's agent, but he dropped her as a client recently. And then, speaking of like just not tying the storyline great together, a guy attacks him.
Yep.
And he's screaming like, "You killed her!" Like, he killed her. Yeah, you like see him in the crowd as a background person, and then he comes running over and he tackles him and is like trying to stab him, and he's like, he killed her. Which brings us.
I want to make note that he like cuts his hand.
Yes.
And they bring that up later because apparently they've gathered this blood as evidence somehow, which seems like they would need a warrant. They're on a closed set.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's hurt himself after being attacked. I guess you could collect it if you charge that guy as a crime, but like to then use that evidence against someone else in another investigation, I feel like you need to talk to a judge or something, but maybe not.
We've had a few instances where the CSIs just kind of go rogue and do what they're going to do. So, I mean, it's not totally out of character. We go to Jim Brass and Warwick. They're with, and I put this in a question mark, ex-boyfriend? I don't know who this guy
Stalker?
is. We never learn what his relationship is. So they're talking with him a little bit, and he's like, just saying how the agent ruined her, yada yada. That brings us to Catherine with the agent, and he's reassuring Catherine, like, don't worry, I wasn't sleeping with her. She just needed constant supervision. So yes, I was at her apartment, and I was staying at her apartment, but I was not having sex with her. She just needed constant supervision. We go to Sarah and Grissom. They're examining clothes that they got from the scene. Sarah's like, I got crabs.
Yeah.
Which Grissom initially assumed
Which I thought was which I thought the whole point was Grissom was like, oh, haha, you mean crabs like, the STI, but really you're going to mean something else. And nope, they basically mean the same.
Yes. Yep.
Crabs.
Yep. So she finds on the jacket the crabs that you can get as a sexually transmitted disease. And this leads them to believe that the person who was visiting her house was, they say homeless. I'm going to say unhoused because that's the more appropriate term to use. They say homeless throughout this entire episode. I'm just choosing to not use the same verbiage, and that this person is missing their jacket. This brings us to Grissom back in the alley with a few different unhoused people. He comes across one of them, a man with a scarf that he notices has like a tiny little smudge on it. So he trades his jacket for the scarf because he thinks that the scarf is related to his crime scene.
It's worth noting that the scarf is in remarkably nice condition.
Very nice condition.
For somebody who's living on the streets, basically.
Yes.
And you can definitely see there's blood on it.
Yeah. So he trades a jacket, he gets the scarf. A woman approaches. She's upset at first because she thinks that Grissom stole the scarf or did something untowards to get the scarf away from Tookie. And he's kind of able to calm her down. But then she has some things on her that he wants. So then he trades his flashlight for her ring and for a kit that she has on her. A quick break from this podcast to tell you about two friends of mine's podcast, Relatively Weird. It is hosted by Kim and Jilly. They are a couple of cousins who get together to talk about all the weird things. You can find Relatively Weird on most major podcast apps, and you can also follow them at Instagram at Relatively Weird the Pod. Now, back to our podcast. We learn from Grissom that the blood on the scarf is in fact the victim's, but, and this might be what you were referencing to as far as samples go, the knife that ex-boyfriend / stalker / we never really find out, his knife had Rod's blood, the agent's blood on it from when he stabbed him, but doesn't have any of the victim's blood on it and doesn't match the wounds that were made on the victim. The wounds on the victim were made by something else other than the knife that ex-boyfriend / stalker was carrying around. Greg Sanders
also don't really say what happens to him, but presumably he's still going to jail.
Yeah, I mean, he assaulted somebody, so
with a deadly weapon.
With a deadly weapon, yeah. So that would be my assumption as well. We don't. Again, this episode is not great about tying a lot of things together, and it's not great about tying loose ends up either. They're just kind of left out there to float about. So Greg Sanders is told to run the epithelials on the ring that Grissom collected. Grissom is then back with this unhoused woman. He offers her a hot dog, but she is adamant she does not want the relish that has preservatives in it. Adamant. She does not want those preservatives inside of her body.
I hope no one tells her what's in a hot dog.
Yes, exactly. I know. I'm like, oh, honey.
I think maybe not by, grams, like preservatives per gram, but certainly by total amount of preservatives that hot dog is going to be loaded.
A lot. Yeah, it's going to be loaded. We learned that this woman's name is Cassie, and we also learned that she's Ashley's sister, and she is telling Grissom that Ashley stole her life, which Grissom's kind of like, what? We come back around to it. I'm fine, friends. This brings us to Catherine and Grissom. They're back with the agent, but they're in his business or studio or place of work. We learn that Casey used to be one of his models, but he gave up on her, and he's insinuating that she did a lot of cocaine and it made her really paranoid and he just couldn't deal with her. Sarah and Grissom, Sarah's still trying to decode this planner. She's still just working real hard to decode this planner. But we do learn from Sarah that Ashley stopped working 2 months ago. So it's been 2 months since she has had any sort of modeling or photography
Which is
job.
About when the agent dropped her.
Yes, right around the same time that the agent dropped her. Yep.
Which I thought they were going to come back to.
Nope.
The why. Like, why did you drop her?
Nope.
We never asked that question.
Nope.
There may be some really obvious reasons why.
I'm trying to decide if I want to reveal it at this stage of the podcast. I think the idea is that she had already started to disfigure herself.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I can't sell this image. And so he dropped her as a client. I think that's what we're supposed to believe. But again, this episode, not the best with tying up loose ends and like really confirming what's going on.
Which is really kind of like what I was looking for, like for them to do. It's like, you should have another conversation with this character and be like, part of the evidence is, wait, why did you bring up there? And all you have to do is say something like, well, she started doing some really unhealthy things to herself, and
yeah, he doesn't mind being brutally honest about people's appearances.
Yeah.
Like, so there's no reason for him to not be like, yeah, she was like mutilating herself and I couldn't sell that.
Yeah. I think the reason they can't have that scene is they can't have the investigators know that information yet.
Right. It has to come up.
That's why I said he could have said something more generic.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, maybe he's trying to defend himself, or like even a scene later on, like, how come you didn't tell us that you dropped your client because she was mutilating herself or something.
Right.
He's like, and you say, hey, I don't know if it was one time or 10 times. Yeah. Once her face, but I knew her face was going to be scarred and she was going to be some BS thing.
Yeah.
That would have like tied that whole loop together, where really like we kind of like we get a little bit more with that, but like a lot of loose ends.
A lot of loose ends in this episode. We go to Jim Brass and Grissom. They're with Cassie in interrogation. Cassie's trying to claim that she tried to save her sister. She is not admitting to this murder. She is saying that she tried to save her. And she's also giving kind of it. I guess this is like better confirmed later on, but she's saying that her sister like couldn't be thin enough, couldn't be pretty enough, like couldn't be perfect enough, that her sister was obsessed with being like perfect enough and that she couldn't get there. And they continue questioning her. She ends up attacking
some of the information that you kind of get to piece together later on.
Yes. She attacks Grissom, and that ends that interrogation. Fair. Grissom then goes back to Doc Robbins. This is where we learn that she had blisters in her throat. They are not from sexual abuse. They are due to eating disorders. She was bulimic and anorexic. She ended up dying due to failed kidneys. So she had she was dying for months. She had like a blood infection. She wasn't getting it treated. She had been dying for months, and she just, her kidney just finally failed after, months of dealing with this problem.
There's a scene with a pair of scissors where Nick is like, these haven't been cleaned in a long time.
Yes. And
just now I pieced that together, that some of her sort of self-medical processes they were giving. I don't think we mentioned this, but we talked about how she had lots of Botox, but they found a case of Botox in her fridge and a bunch of needles.
Yes.
When we look at her apartment. So like she was basically self-administering Botox. Cosmetic surgeries of different types.
Yeah.
And that lack of clean tool could have led to blood poisoning.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think I only just now kind of put that together. Obviously, the sort of diseases of bulimia and anorexia, they're going to put your body in a weakened state. You're going to be way more susceptible
to infection.
Things. Yeah. And I'm sure that had a big part of it as well.
Yes. But, it's supposed to be compounding factors, right? It's kind of a like, yes, technically she died because her kidneys failed, but her kidney failed because her body was in a weakened state due to the eating disorders. And then she got the blood infection, probably, most likely because she was self-mutilating and not cleaning her tools.
And, giving herself enemas and sticking her, probably not clean hands in her mouth. And there's a lot of ways in which, the show never really actually explains it. No. We're just extrapolating.
We're extrapolating. We're coming to this end game. The episode really does not do it. Catherine enters Grissom's office. We learn that Cassie is a paranoid schizophrenic. We then go to Sarah sorting through the food wrappers, and after going through the food wrappers, you could kind of see like a little light, like if this was a cartoon, you would see like a little light bulb like boop
Tink.
over her head, and she goes back to the code. Catherine and Grissom are then examining the prints that they lifted from Ashley's apartment, and we learned that Cassie, her sister, was in the apartment. Like her prints were there. Nick and Warwick are with Greg Sanders in the hallway. We learn that the scrapings, like the skin scrapings that they pulled, or like the tissue scrapings that they pulled from underneath the victim's fingernails, are her own. And they're like, wait, what? They're like, wait, you sure it's nobody else's? And he's like, nope, it's her own. Like, this is from herself.
Like asking if it's the sisters because they think that she's the prime suspect now.
Yes.
Often they're looking for defensive sort of like scraping.
Yeah, a lot of times if you're being attacked, in trying to defend yourself, you collect a bit of your attacker.
And again, they don't say this, but the many things she was doing, whether that's forcing herself to throw up or picking at her skin or whatever it is probably how she accumulated these cells under her fingernails.
Yes. We then go to Sarah with the entire team, and she explains the code. I'm not going to spend too much time on explaining this code. I'll just say that basically the code is was a way for the victim to track calories in and calories out.
Yeah.
Like
through various means of out.
Yes, through various means of out. And this brings up the conversation of body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia disorder, I think is what it's called. BDD. And it's where, and this is going to be a very simplified explanation of this, so please forgive me. Actually, let me look up an actual. I don't want to do that. Let me go look up like a good. Let me go get up a real. Okay, I'm just going to read the first line of this like paragraph because it goes into a lot of different things. But body dysmorphic disorder, BDD, is a mental health condition that causes people to have an intense focus on their appearance and body image, even if flaws are unnoticeable or non-existent. So that is what BDD is. And so they believe that she had BDD, and part of her struggles with BDD was that she didn't think she was even. She didn't think she was symmetrical. She didn't think that like one half of her matched the other side of her. And this was...
They do a bad job, I think, of explaining this whole thing, and Grissom goes into this whole thing about... But this is like one of the cringiest scenes, in my opinion, when they're like, oh, it's not
and he
about
compares
this,
it to bugs.
This. Yeah, and then they're comparing it to like, oh, it's not about looking good, it's about reproduction. And it's like, you're really oversimplifying what is, I can only imagine, a horrid mental illness.
A hellscape for this woman. Like a hellscape for this woman.
And the end of so they do a very bad job. I think they oversimplify their explanation of the whole thing. But there's a million different things that could be in her head at any one point in time because of this disorder.
Yes.
And as everything that she's doing to herself is likely related to the way she's perceiving herself.
Yes.
And that is like a really good, like a really intense, but I think good representation in the sense that people don't understand like how extreme it can be in someone else's head.
Yes.
Something that seems innocuous to them. And so that punch, I think, like that level of gravitas in this episode was actually quite good. I think that someone laid a really good medical foundation for this episode. And then I think the writers really dropped the ball on the rest.
Yeah.
And, but I'm sure they have good medical consultants.
I mean, one would hope so. We learn in the scene, and we kind of brought this up a little bit, that part of her measuring the output was like weighing her output. So she was like weighing her bowel movements and such. And this is where they finally come out and say that she attacked herself.
I thought you were going to say she had poop in the bag.
Oh, no. I mean, they do have poop in the bag, but this is where they finally legitimately say that she attacked herself. This is where we also learn that her sister... Or we see a reenactment wherein her sister obviously did not kill her, but her sister came in, found her dead, and then moved her body. Like put her in the shopping cart, and then pushed the shopping cart to where she was eventually found.
That like whole, this is like the big reveal. Mm-hmm. Like they don't do it by character. They just sort of like like kind of show you.
Yeah, we just get a reenactment of it, which brings us to Grissom with Cassie on the strip. And this is, I feel like, another really weird line from Grissom, because we know that Cassie is like paranoid schizophrenic. She, has drug use issues. There's a lot going on with her. She is not coming from a rational place, but we're supposed to assume that Grissom is. And he says something, or she says something about, well, she's not bleeding anymore.
Yeah.
Like talking about her sister. And then Grissom is just like, yeah, death does have some advantages. What?
That's not the kind of message. Yeah.
Her sister just died. That's not what she's looking for.
It's heartless.
Yeah, this is not a good Grissom episode by any stretch of the imagination. So he's still trying to get more information out of her for reasons I don't understand, and she basically just says that her sister didn't have any secrets. The secrets had her sister.
Yep.
And that once Cassie finds what she's looking for, like she finds that like missing piece, she will sleep the most perfect sleep. So you would think that this is the end of the episode. It's not, my friends. We go to scenes of Grissom walking down the strip. He ends up at a fountain. The sound is like not quite right. It's like muted at some points, and then you like acutely hear the water falling at other points. It's a little bit strange.
Gets hit by a car crossing the street.
Yeah, and then we get a voiceover wherein Grissom is talking, and he's talking about that a lot of CSI work is hearing and listening and how to listen. And he can read lips, so he could technically, quote unquote, hear what people are saying. Like he could understand what people are saying, but he wouldn't be able to decipher how they are saying it, which is a very large component. Yes, exactly. So then Grissom is back with the doctor who,
from the first
Grissom
scene.
From the first Grissom scene, he is back to the doctor, and he has a condition called autosclerosis, which is a non-reversible, most likely genetic condition that bony growths are growing in his ear canal and are going to cause him to lose his hearing.
Yeah. And you hear in your ear, this is a little mini science with Nick, because we'll make it quick, is that you have 3 little bones in your ear, and they work together to amplify or whatever. I actually don't know exactly what it is, but they transfer the sound from your drum into your inner ear, which is sort of protected and separated from the outside world. And those 3 bones, basically are like a thing that vibrates. If you ever seen like the speaker disc, right, vibrate when it's making noise, they transfer that sound. So I imagine if any of those bones had anything going on with it, you would have a real problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know this to be true, because again, I'm not an audiologist or an ENT or whatever. Like I have no real knowledge, but I think this is like maybe one of those things where like a cochlear implant could help a person hear. Because it's like his hairs, like the things that actually translate vibrations into like noise for your brain to process are intact, but the things that help that sound get to those are not working. So like in certain like audio implant to basically bypass those and do it for you, is my understanding how those work. But I'll be honest, I don't actually know that to be true. I just think that that's what they do.
Okay.
So if anyone thinks differently, I apologize. But for everyone else, I think pretty sure that what it is. That's Google's your friend.
Yep.
Go look
and
it up.
Grissom wants to know like how long. Like how long does he have until he like significantly loses his hearing? And the doctor can't tell him that. Like it's just not information that she's able to provide. And this is the actual end of the episode. And while we've talked about it a little bit, let's continue talking about it. Nick, what did you think about today's episode?
I think I'm not a big fan. And the more we talked about it this episode, the worse that got. It's definitely going to be a skip in my book. Although there's a lot of important things in this episode. Well, okay, there's one real important thing, which is Grissom's storyline, which, they just kind of like pull this. They really should have done a better. I almost want to go back and check a few things in other episodes, but I do not believe they've laid a lot of groundwork for this.
They actually have.
Okay.
there are, well, maybe a lot is being generous, but there are definitely scenes scattered throughout where like his hearing is muffled, or he has to like ask someone to repeat themselves. And
so this is something you've been picking up on through the season, knowing this was coming.
Yes.
That's
good.
I
don't think you would particularly notice it if you didn't know that this was coming, but knowing that this was coming, I was like, oh, right, this is like a scene foreshadowing that.
Ever since we found out about his mom, and I've sort of figured that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, that's why they made such a big deal about it. And so it's been very minor then, because like, obviously, I mean, when it first, like during the scene, they like remind you that it's genetic and his mom had it.
Yes.
And that's how she was deaf. I was like, oh, I almost wish they didn't say that, because I feel like that's almost too spoon feedy.
Yeah, a little too heavy.
That's the thing to say. That's the thing to say to another character in like the season premiere of next season, not necessarily tell your audience right now. I was like, okay, they must not think the audience remembers this at all.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is definitely an episode that the more that you look at it, the worse it gets. It's like the more time you spend on it, you're like, for probably the first time I watched this, the first watch through, I was like, okay. I don't think I ever loved this episode, but I think probably the first time I watched it, having no other context, I was like, and probably again, I watched this when it came out, so I'm also now more progressive in my thinking, and so some of the things that bother me now watching this episode probably didn't really stand out to me as blatantly.
This is one of the cringiest episodes.
Okay.
I kind of said it before, like there's a lot of little things, and then you're picking up on things that I'm not even picking up on.
Yeah. It's a very cringy episode. Like, oh yeah, there's a scene, we didn't talk about this because it was like pretty minute, but if we're just talking about cringe moments, when Nick and Warwick are examining her car, and her car has all the food wrappers and like the fast food and the junk food, and Nick with like disgust is like, oh, are we sure this is the victim's car? As if like an attractive woman can't eat junk food.
Yeah.
Like as if those things there's just like no way for those things to be reconciled. And then the episode is like, oh, it can be reconciled, but only if they have a horrendous eating disorder, which is not
There's a scene
the way to go about
it. Work refers to, oh my God, I can't remember main characters' names. This is really bad. Work refers to Sarah as a control freak. Like he's like being very...
because she writes in shorthand.
Yeah, like it's like very judgmental. It's like the stuff like that is scattered all throughout this episode. And like, worse than like, I feel like it's been a while. Nick has often been really bad. His character's been written like
but
this,
everyone else has been okay.
Everyone is written like this episode.
Yeah, I think Catherine's probably the only one that walks away from this without a moment.
We might need a cringe score next season.
Being cringe. Oh gosh, I hope not.
Let's not, because I have a lot of faith and hope in the series. And, you know, we're trying to be positive here.
Yeah.
Who are you, a CSI podcast? So it's important to call out that these things exist and that we're better people than we were 22 years ago as a society.
Yes.
And reflect on it that way. And if we're like 3 more seasons in, we're still calling this stuff out, maybe we'll consider it.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to like reevaluate and introduce a cringe score. So this is also a skip for me, and there's just too much cringe, too much. It feels like instead of an episode, because I think both of us like episodes that progresses the main cast characters forward. This felt like it was like taking characters steps backwards. Yeah, it wasn't developing their characters, it was like taking their characters backwards. And then there was just so many like loose ends not tied up and things not connected that, you know, even having watched it twice and like taking meticulous notes, I was like, wait, what is supposed to be happening here? Like, I don't understand this.
I don't know enough. Like, obviously, I've never seen the show, but like, was it like getting to the end of the season and they were like, we got to give people some flaws for them to address next year?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe because they just, I think the only people, I think Catherine comes out looking fine. And somehow, which I guess I'm happy for him, Greg Sanders comes out looking fine. Yeah. He showed up, he did his job.
He's got to stop eating ramen noodles. I mean, that stuff will kill you.
That was another scene where I was like, he needs to eat. He's literally going from like one part of the office to another part of the office while eating. He's not like sitting down with his legs up, playing a video game, eating. He's literally like walking through the hallways, eating. Leave Greg Sanders alone. He's allowed to eat.
Leave Greg alone.
Leave Greg alone. But So I think this is a skip for both of us. Yeah, definitely not a great episode. We shall see if the beginning of season 3 redeems the show when we return with our review of season 3, episode 1, Revenge is Best Served Cold.
And I might suggest that last season we did a top 5, bottom 5. That maybe we do something with that, and maybe that can be a Patreon perk.
Oh yeah, maybe that can be a Patreon. Yeah, so maybe we'll record our season 2 recap and have that available on the Patreon. So if you haven't already, you can sign up as a CSI level 1 on Patreon by going to patreon.com and searching for Who Are You, a CSI podcast. You can also find us on Facebook by searching for Who Are You, a CSI podcast. We are also on Twitter/X and Instagram at Who Are You CSI Pod. And you can also email us at whoareyoucsipod@gmail.com. But otherwise, we will talk to you next week.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.